I love speaking to people who aren't normal. It's basically that. It's basically this entire podcast, just one weirdo after another. If you're not already, then please make sure that you subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you're listening through. And don't forget that I also have a Patreon. Hello, listeners. Now, what was your favourite subject in school? And did you love the subject for the subject, or perhaps it was the teacher that made it special? Maybe you love the subject so much that it's now part of your career. Well, for me, I distinctly remember loving two subjects in particular: drama and history. And today I'm going back to school and sitting down with my old history teacher and historical reenactor, Mr. Howell, or his real name, Gareth, which feels just too weird to say. Welcome, Gareth. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for joining me, because you are very, very busy at the moment because you're in a show.
I am. I'm in the hospital pantomime at the moment, so we're performing Aladdin at the moment.
And you play the villain.
I do. Abanazar, the evil magician.
And with that voice, how could you not?
There's a lot of deep booming laughter. So.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. Well, hopefully you can use this podcast to warm your voice up slowly.
Yes.
Now, I wanted you on the podcast because, as you know, I'm taking a bit of a deep dive because of a particular reason. During the pandemic of 2020, I noticed a lot of people starting to reject modern life, and they started to basically turn back the clocks and strip everything back and live a lot more simply. And the reason I knew of these people is because they started vlogging it, and my TikTok and my Instagram was filled with people living like eras gone by. And I think the rejection of modern is heavily on the rise. And I wanted to speak to somebody who has the education sort of behind them to sort of explore where we might go too far with that and where is just the right balance. But let's start with the basics. So where did your interest in history begin?
Well, I started to get interested in history, I suppose, when I was in primary school. And so even from a very young age, because I was looking back, I was very autistic. I found it difficult to engage with people, but I loved reading and sitting down with a book. And also I found going around castles and abbeys, ruined stones surrounded by grass, to be so beautiful. And I found that the more history I read, the more I wanted to read. But I also found that really helpful to be able to start talking and engaging with people. I found that the more I understood about the world and people, the easier I found it to be able to interact fully with the people around me. And so I think history has given me a real gift, really. It's allowed me to come out of myself in a way. Certainly couldn't have imagined when I was in primary school me going on stage as a pantomime villain or belting the lines out in front of a large crowd. And so I think that might be why so many people go back to look in history, is that you can gain a lot personally by going back and studying the past.
Oh, I love that. Because I've heard that sort of thing before, that by looking backwards, we can one, prevent history from repeating itself, and we can two, understand ourselves a little bit better. So why were you round these beautiful ruins as a child? Was it part of your school curriculum, or did your parents take you to visit them?
No, I was very lucky that my parents recognised that I was really happy around these places. And so if I was asked what I'd want to do for my birthday, for example, I know a lot of children say I'm going to have a party. I was like, oh, could I go and see that castle? And if we went away on a family holiday, I was terrified of going out in the sun, which my parents loved going to Spain, so that was a bit of a strain.
Oh,
I think it was because I'd read about the dangers of sunburn leading to skin cancer, and as a 6-year-old, that terrified me. However, under a large floppy hat, if I could go and find a nearby Roman mosaic or a ruins, then my dad would take me around, and bless him, he had no interest in history, but he was he was patient enough to steer a young child around as I rushed from plaque to plaque, trying to read it all. Really happy memories of a childhood, really.
And you mentioned your autism. Did you find that you were kind of a sponge for information, and did you sort of have any struggles with sort of fitting in, and did going to these castle ruins sort of make you feel a bit more at home? Or
yeah, it really was. It was like they were like sort of safe spaces because they're fairly quiet. That's the thing.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And for children who are struggling with loud noise, actually a quiet castle is a real place of refuge, really. You're right, I could just absorb. I found that I could just absorb the facts, the dates, the names of countries, the flags.
Wow.
And it was something that you could study, you could master. And I think young people, because obviously when you're born you don't know anything.
Yeah.
And you're surrounded by adults who seem to know it all. To be able to learn something and to gain mastery of a subject is really empowering for young people, actually, to suddenly realise that you know something that the adults haven't learned or haven't remembered, and to be able to say, oh, I think you'll find that was King John, or that was Richard II, and realise that the adults around you don't know can give you a lot of self-confidence if you're struggling.
I hope you don't mind that I asked about your autism, but I really like the idea and the notion that these places of stillness, these places frozen in time because of their stillness and their quiet, gave you a safe space. It's weird because in a different sort of way, I think people are using points of history for their safe spaces now, but they're just doing it in a more theatrical, flamboyant kind of way, as in they're making content out of it, for one, but they're adapting their entire lives. They're creating this reality for themselves by the way they've decorated their house, by the way that they're dressing, by the food that they're eating. Do you think history has always been... Is escape the right word to use for history or not?
Yeah, I think you can use the idea of an escape. And that's where it can, you were saying in the introduction, it can get dangerous because... Of course, when we look at history for that, we only take a narrow part of history. So I reenact the 12th century normally. So last time I was doing a reenactment, I was dressed as a Cistercian monk at Tintern Abbey. And I absolutely loved my weekend as a Cistercian monk, following the rules, doing the Latinate prayers, doing medical displays. But of course, if I got sick, I still had access to antibiotics. And so we do tend to cherry pick what we take from the past. So we think, oh, I wish I'd lived in that era, which I often find I'm thinking, oh yeah, it'd be great to go back there. We forget the benefits of modern medicine and modern food production, and so we tend to keep those with us. But that doesn't mean that it's not valuable to go back and look at perhaps what we've lost, that what we used to have. In amidst the suffering from a lack of antibiotics, they lived happy lives and they lived good, much like people today. But we've lost some things that they had, even though we've gained an improved understanding of science and technology. And I think the idea that we've lost I think a lot of people feel that they've lost an idea of community and of place, and that the modern world we've become very atomistic. I think that because we have our individual rights, which are fantastic, and I'm in no way suggesting that that's a bad thing, but because we have such a great focus on the individual and individualism, I think conversely, the individual can then get lost because they almost get abandoned to try and find their own way. And whereas previously, you of course, you didn't have those rights, but you had your place in community, and people looked after you, and you looked after others. And so I think it's a search for balance.
Did you say the word was atomistic?
Yes.
What does that mean, please?
An atomistic world is one where we all stand alone, I suppose. Wow. That we're all broken up into our constituent parts. So if you took a car, you could take it down into its atoms, and it all float, but it's no longer a car then, and it no longer does what you would wish it to do, although the parts themselves are all individually fine. I
think we are all craving individuality, and by sort of scraping and climbing desperately to try and find that individuality and make our mark on the world, which is much more bigger and complicated than it's ever been. I feel more a small fish in a big pond than I think I've ever felt. We're actually losing individuality.
Yes.
And we are losing a sense of community. Things don't feel as tangible anymore. Things don't feel... you don't see things through to fruition anymore. Like, our attention span is completely, it's destroyed. And I think you're right. And do you think is it problematic that we cherry pick? I mean, maybe not so much you, but people online, maybe, is it problematic when content creators are cherry picking the parts of a certain era that they did like and maybe not addressing other parts?
Well, I think it can be, but it depends on how you use it. And so some people take I think some quite negative parts of the past. And so occasionally popping up on my social media feed will be people talking about how men were men.
Yeah.
as if they should try and impose obsolete ideas of gender roles onto people around them.
Yes.
And that can get, that I find very unpleasant and very dangerous. And so, I mean, it's easy to say that we should only take the positives that we've lost rather than just taking the negatives. But of course, that's what they think they're doing. They think they're taking the positives, whereas I look at what they're posting with horror and think, why would you try and resurrect?
Why that bit?
Yeah, why of all that you could
Yeah,
take, why reach back to the past and try and take that horror back out of the box?
Yeah.
And so it can be dangerous, but I think you're always going to have that. And going back to the idea of rights, of course, these people have an absolute right to try and believe what they wish to believe, as long as they don't try and impose it upon others. And I think that's the thing about content creators who reach back to the past. You can reach back and take what you need from the past, as long as you don't try and impose it onto other people. Then it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And as somebody who has studied history at a degree level and beyond, because I see that too in my social media feed. I see the same for women, where we belong and where we should be and what we should be doing and what we should be wearing. And sometimes I get the comments on my content where it's like, oh yes, when women dressed how they should dress. When women dress properly. And I'm like, oh no, that wasn't the intention of this video at all.
Yeah, that's not quite what we're trying to get here.
Exactly. Yes. Do you think, as somebody who has got the education behind them, does it ever frustrate you to see? Because the danger with social media is everybody's got access to it and everybody's got access to spread information en masse. And if they're spreading information without the research behind it, it could be wrong and it could be false and it could be inaccurate. Is that element a bit worrying, or is it frustrating as a historian to see that and go, well, that's not right, they didn't wear that, even if it's something as simple as they didn't wear that?
Oh, it really can be. And the problem is that because there is so much of the past, that we all have huge gaps in our knowledge. And no matter how long you spend studying it. But then social media can occasionally attempt to fill these large gaps with some really bizarre theories. And so I was talking to a good friend of mine. He's a DT teacher.
Oh, yeah.
So his knowledge of history is in places excellent, in other areas patchy.
Sure.
And so he was talking about the ancient world and whether they had power tools. And he was talking about the Bronze Age. And it struck me that he actually didn't know any of the Bronze Age civilizations.
Wow.
And so when he was saying, we don't know why they did this, I said, well, actually, we have letters from the city of and we have stone tablets where they talk about the destruction of cities, that we know their names. We have letters that merchants sent to their families, talking about what they've been buying and selling, and about cities being destroyed and why armies are being leveled to try and defend against the sea peoples. So we actually have huge records of that time period. It's just because you don't know it. It's not the absence that you think it is. That knowledge is there if you wish to gain it.
I think today that could apply to pretty much every facet of the world. Just because the knowledge isn't there for you doesn't mean it's not there to gain.
Yes.
And I think people should want to learn. I think before you speak, before you post, do a little bit of research.
Yes.
Because even in just, you wouldn't think it'd be much, but even in just donning a 1950s dress and baking a loaf of bread using a genuine 1950s recipe, it's amazing the connotations that come about just because of that one originally innocently posted video. And I found that I really have to start doing my research. I mean, I'm writing a script about a sapphic love story set in the 1940s. And to go back in gay history has been really interesting, finding out where the first gay clubs were and who was running them and where they were based, and were there more in France or the UK or America, and how people, women loving women used to live their lives, and the rugby clubs they were involved in. It's just brilliant. And when you do deign to research, you get more ideas and inspiration for content anyway. So I don't know why people wouldn't.
No. I mean, I know all our lives are busy. That's the thing. Of course.
I mean,
so
that's
it's
true.
easy to say that, I don't have the time.
Yeah.
But if you have the time, I think, to try and post an opinion on a time period, you probably have the time to read about the time period.
Absolutely.
It is more difficult, though, of course, to do it that way than to just sit angrily upon your keyboard and try and impose what you would wish the world to have been onto people's views. But about you're making a loaf of bread, that sort of activity is actually really useful for historians, which I know might sound odd, but when people do wear period clothes and try and use period equipment to do the tasks they do, you actually learn a huge amount about what life is really like for people. And so, as an example, there was the Roman army had a wooden shaped T shape.
Okay.
And historians didn't really know what it was for, but a reenactor made it, and then discovered that actually with that bit of wood, you could, with leather thonging, tie all the soldiers' equipment to the thonging, and it was a rucksack.
No.
But it's not a bag as we'd understand it. It is a bar, but the bar hangs down the front of your chest, hangs over your shoulder, and you tie everything down. And as you walk along, you've got the bar on you, carrying your stuff. Not quite as convenient as a modern rucksack.
Of course, yeah.
On the other hand, it can carry odd-shaped and large items because
Yes.
they're dangling down. And it was only when someone actually thought about trying to use it that they were like,
It clicked.
that's what it does.
Oh, that's really
Yeah.
cool to know, because my biggest interest is in civilian life during World War
Yes.
II, particularly in Britain. And so I have a lot of items that would have been very much utilised during
Yes.
civilian life in World War II. And it's so nice to know that, because when, historians might go so far, but a reenactor or a content creator or a method actor might go that one step further, and they might actually start living like it,
Yes.
not just reading about it. And the two are valuable in their individual ways, aren't they?
Well, certainly so, because as it is their everyday life, and then for them, it's mundane items. Of course, they don't write down how you use it, because why would you bother? I mean, I don't. When I ate my sausage sandwich this morning, I didn't write how I used a plate, because
No.
clearly it's obvious how I use a
Very
plate.
true, very true.
And yet, when these items then go out of use and it passes from living memory, you then have the question of looking back and going, well, actually, what was that for? What did it do?
Yes.
And to them, it was so obvious that they've left no record at all.
Why would they document it?
Yes.
We wouldn't document using a washing machine like you said with the
No.
plate. You wouldn't think, would you?
No, because how would people not know? But
Yes,
then you get to the
yes.
stage that people genuinely don't know what that bit of kit was for. And so they've recently found, I was reading in Greece, it's a stone disc, and it turns out to have the markings of star positions upon it. But it took ages to work that out because it's got an extra star, and scientists are trying to work out whether it went into supernova between them making it and us looking at it today. So have they recorded a star that no longer exists?
Yes.
Or have we got the use of... Are they not stars at all? We don't know.
Oh, fascinating.
Because it could be, but equally, we don't know, because these things, they knew what it was for.
Yeah.
And it was obvious to them.
Yeah.
But as soon as you start using it, you start to think, well, actually, this could be a use for it.
Absolutely. And why does it matter? Why does it matter? Because you're a history teacher in a secondary school right now. What kids will be aware of compared to when I was younger will be completely different. They'll be growing up, with social media even more so than I did. And I really did grow up with it. And they'll be growing up with everything being touchscreen, and their understanding of history may be a bit different to my understanding. Why does it matter in the modern world where there's an app for everything? Why do we care about that disc and how it was used? Why should it be kept alive?
Well, I think history should be kept alive, because when the past is a foreign country, is often said. They live differently to us. But in the same way that as we learn more about we learn about the countries around us. We learn how to speak French. We learn how to speak German, and understand their cultures. I think as we understand more about other people, firstly, it makes us better people in of ourselves, because it makes us more tolerant, more understanding of other people's differences. But also, I think as we learn about the past, we come to learn more about ourselves. What matters to us, what makes a happy life, what makes a good life, by looking at how people who stood on the same bit of land that you stood, what they valued, what they achieved, and what they failed at, gives us a chance to live better lives ourselves, I think. And so I love playing the role of a Cistercian monk, and what I found, as I'm not a terribly religious man, but I was happy to don the robes of a monk and start to lead the Latinate Mass in Tintern Abbey, is I was amazed by how calming it was.
Wow.
And after I'd been teaching for a week. I work as a volunteer police officer in the evenings. Two very stressful jobs.
Wow.
But
where do you find the time to do all this stuff?
You've got to keep busy. But
just tell me right now, Mr. Howell, are you a time traveller? Just be honest with me. You can come clean now.
It appears that way. But I knelt in in Tintern Abbey, just going through the Latinate prayers and having people dressed the same way, also doing the same things as I was doing together. None of us able to sing particularly well, but all belting it out. Do you know what? It was amazingly calm. You found you had the time to stop and to think about what was making you happy or what was making you want. It was very mindful, is what I would say, and I found that really useful. Personally for that weekend, but also gave me an understanding that actually these monks, although it sounds like and it can be a tough regimen of prayer, why they're doing it and what they're getting out of the ability to just follow through and to know where they are and to know what their next task will be. It was really nice.
And had you not delved into that little little piece of history, you never would have had that mindful, reflective experience for you to go, oh wow, I could maybe apply this to myself, and this would help me in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And it seems an obvious answer, but to take time out in the day to do something that is simple, but is for you. And so my partner makes jigsaws. And I think that's actually very similar in its way to the monastic chanting.
Yes.
Because it's simple. It requires no particular thought, but it can be incredibly calming. And you realise how important that stuff can become in the day. Definitely. And by studying the past and seeing actually, they had stresses too, but this is how they dealt with it. And you start to ask yourself, what's my prayer, as it were? What's my time out to reflect? It can be very useful.
Absolutely. And I get a lot of that from... when I study civilian life in World War II, during World War II, that notion of being grateful for what you have, that notion for working with what you've got, teaches me things even today. It teaches me to the joy of the task, the enjoyment of the task again, and it's revitalised that within me. When I was on my phone a lot, it's actually taught me to not rely on things so heavily and actually make them for yourself. Obviously, I think a lot of people are this opinion. I think it's very ignorant to think that people of the past can't teach us anything.
Yes.
So for the young people that you're teaching, have you seen any change in young people's passion for learning about the past, or has it always been quite steady? Is it all dependent on what's going on in the world today?
There's always been a small number who love learning about the past, and there's always a large cohort that can't understand the point of learning about the past. Often, sadly, history, I think, is something that you come to as you get older. As you see the world around you change, you realise that those who are older than you have seen even more change, and you start to come to appreciate that, and you start to ask the question again of why. I think when we're very young, we're always asking why, but then as we get older, and certainly by the time they reach me in secondary school. That tendency to keep on going, why, has really been ground out of us.
Wow.
As I think as adults we can get very impatient with young children. And I know if you've got a 2-year-old, it can be very annoying to hear why. And also we stop getting answers to the questions of why, because our why becomes more complex.
Yes.
It's no longer... why are we having to go to bed at 8 o'clock? We're now starting to ask, well, why is the sky blue? And why are they at war with them? Why does that person not like that person? They become very complex questions that the answers become difficult to understand if you can get them.
Yeah.
But so in school, there are always some young people who still have that question in their heads of why, and they turn to history to try and understand that. But there's always a large number that I think have sadly just stopped assuming that they'll get the answer, or if that they'll understand the answer. But hopefully as they get older, they'll come back to it. And you try and give them the bits and pieces so that when they do come back to it, they've got a door into a world that has been lost.
I think that, I completely understand. And I think the fact that the why becomes more complicated, and therefore the answers aren't always there, and that's probably why young people stop asking. It's quite sad. And have you noticed that has the same cohort who are a little bit indifferent and disinterested has stayed the same from like, as the generations have carried on, or have you noticed a difference in the interest and love of history, or is it?
No, I'd say it's about the same. I mean, one of the great things about studying the past is, of course, that you come across the same problems. And
Yeah.
one of the oldest bits of writing we have is from a grumpy old man complaining that children aren't as respectful as they were when he was growing up. And it could easily be an article from the Daily Mail, quite frankly.
Yeah, it really could, yeah.
It's phrased in more or less the same way that when he was a lad, that he respected his elders and worked hard when young, and that he didn't understand the crazy fashions of these young people. And you read it, and it is very understandable, because even though he died thousands of years ago, you feel like you know him.
And who was that?
I'm afraid offhand I can't remember his name, and I'm not sure. If it's known.
No.
But given research, you could probably find out the name. But it's a lovely insight. So I don't think the numbers have changed. I suspect, because I often find myself thinking, if only I had the classes I had a few years ago. They got it. You remember those who had an interest.
Yes.
And I think when we think about back to our past, our own personal history, we tend to remember the good bits, because why would you want to remember anything else?
Of course.
Looking at your own past through rose-tinted glasses, as they say. But I think the numbers are the same. I think the attention span is getting shorter because of smartphones.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me one iota.
But that's not unusual, because strangely, with the invention of writing, human memory got worse, because. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Now that's really interesting.
Yeah, because previously you had to remember everything, but as soon as you could write something down, then you didn't. And the mind's a muscle like anything else. The more you use it, the better it becomes, the stronger it becomes. And so, a pre-literate society, you had a superb memory. And so, in ancient Greece, a young person growing up had to learn the Iliad and the Odyssey word for word, and that was their education.
Wow.
But we're talking there about 700 pages to be learnt word for word, and that's the mark of an educated adult, that they can do that. And I couldn't do it.
No, nobody could.
I've got lying around here my Panto script. I mean, I've only got a few. I check it before I go on stage every time, just to make sure I've got it.
Yes.
But then with writing, the human memory got worse, and now that we carry a smartphone around with us, we've got all the knowledge of the world in our pocket. And so we just don't use our memory as much, because someone says, "Oh, what year was that?" You go, "Well, wait a minute, it's that."
Yeah, and I think that applies to so much in today's world. Like, I don't feel like we have like a passion for learning it anymore. Like, I don't know whether people know how to like sew or like how to grow vegetables, or if people like you say, use their memory, because I'm the same. If you don't know the date of something or what that guy's name was, you Google it.
Yeah.
God damn you, Google. But
Yes,
you Google it. And if you're not sure how to do something, watch a YouTube tutorial. Now, I love the school of YouTube, don't get me wrong. I think it's great, and that is still learning. It's just more visual. And actually, for visual learners out there, that's wicked.
Oh, it's fantastic.
But I think in a lot of ways, because smartphones are so damn smart, is it a sense that we don't have to be anymore? Are we getting dumber?
Possibly, because I mean, when you go to, let's say you go around a cathedral, if you know the information before you're there, you know what you're looking for.
True.
And can then try and find it. Whereas if you're relying upon the information gained from a smartphone, it's a case that you don't even know that the knowledge is there to find. So you don't look for it, and you don't recognise what you see as something you should know about. But you could, in your pocket, have that information.
Yes. And do you think that on that vein, we're not living in the moment as much then? Because like you said, the joy of discovery. So you running into an old castle, you might find a plaque and you might read that plaque and go, oh, that makes sense now. Look what I've just learned. But nowadays you would probably Google it on your smartphone first, so you almost know what you're walking into. So that element of surprise is kind of gone, and we're not really living in the moment as much, would you say?
Very much so. I mean, if you go on a train, I occasionally go down to the south coast by train.
Lovely.
And you see people sat there on their smartphones reading away. Yeah. And you're not looking out of the window seeing what's there. And if you travel south from London, you go through what's called the GHQ Line, the last stop line if the Germans had landed in Britain. Wow. A series of bunkers and canals that was going to be the last halt line before London. And in an early morning with the sun rising off these grey pillboxes all in a line, it talks to you about a nation in under threat and working so hard to try and guard them and what they were trying to think about, how they might have reacted, the might have beens. And anybody in that train could get that information from their smartphone. But what they're doing is they're scrolling through, and they're probably not doing anything in particular. And you're right, they're not seeing what's around them. And as we walk around our cities, there are old buildings, there are statues, and there are plaques where great things happen, and we have access to the information, but we ignore it. So in Nottingham, if you go to the World Service, there's a little plaque saying that the French general from the Battle of Blenheim was kept there as a prisoner of war. And hundreds of people will walk past it every day, but they won't see the building, and they won't appreciate the story of what it was. Because that general, he was allowed out because he'd given his word not to escape. And so he was allowed out every day, and he'd cross the road to go to the Royal Children to have a drink. And they would just trust him to... Because why would a gentleman possibly not keep his word? He was a general.
Wow.
And it's a part of their city's history, and I think quite a charming little story of a man going, well, I'll just go and grab myself a pint actually. But not seen.
No, it isn't seen, because just take the United Kingdom for one. We are steeped in history.
Yes.
Like I say, it's a double-edged sword, because if it hadn't been social media, I wouldn't have known this information, but maybe without social media, I would have noticed it. But did you know that in London, there are certain, they just look like iron fences, but they were actually, you turn them around and they'd be gurneys to carry the wounded away.
Wow.
And some of them still exist.
Yeah.
And you can see how, oh yes, that doesn't actually look like a fence if I really look at it. It does look like more of a bed. And the reason I know about that is because I follow a lady called, I think her name's History Alice, and she does really, really good stuff, and she's working with the National Trust and everything, and it's great. But with loads of pieces of history, statues and plaques and gravestones, and if we just looked up a little bit, we might see them, but I don't think we do. And I think there's a lot of hobbies that are dying out, like my partner and myself are quite unique, because he's very into heritage railway.
Oh, nice.
So he's been a cleaner on the footplate at Ruddington for a while. He was training to be a fireman. Yeah. But he's taught me all about locomotives and I've spent many a lovely day at Loughborough. And it's great for me because I get to go for a 1940s weekend, and I get to dress in the dresses, and he gets to watch the locos go by. So for both of us, it works really well. And obviously we both are pigeon keepers, and that was an entire community.
Of course.
And then, because I try not to be ignorant, when I rescued little Penny, I went, right, I want to learn about pigeons. And by opening that one little door, I learned about pigeons in World War II. I learned about pigeons in Mesopotamian tablets. I learned about pigeons delivering the results of the Roman Olympics. I read about pigeons delivering the results of chariot races. And I was like, oh my goodness, these birds have been with us for 10,000 years.
Yes, working away for us.
Exactly. And now look at how we treat them. But it was great because I looked up, because for one time, and I'm no saint, believe me, but for one time I was at the pub with my friends and I wasn't on my damn phone.
Yes.
We were talking, we were having a drink, and we were talking, and because we were talking and because I was looking at the world around me, I saw that little pigeon, and I must have given something off to her, because she felt that she had found a place of safety, and she popped onto my lap, and then my life changed forever. Because I was looking up.
Yeah.
And after that, I used all the wonderful parts of technology to learn more about pigeons, but I also read some of it in actual books as well. Yeah. And I don't think that happens as much anymore, which is a crying shame. And I want to ask you, talking of, they're not weird hobbies. I would say they're unique hobbies, brilliantly unique. How on earth did you get into reenacting? How does one get into reenacting?
Well, all reenactment groups are really keen to have members because it's a lovely community. Yeah. So you can either choose a time period you'd like to reenact, or if you're in a city, you can look to see what reenactment societies are based in your city. So when I first joined reenactment, I was a pikeman for the King in the English Civil War, but I have a real interest in the history of medicine, so I was trained to be an English Civil War doctor. Mm. But then I went to university. And I'd only been reenacting the Civil War for a few months. The university reenactment group did the 12th century.
Wow.
And so I thought, well, actually, I'll do that.
Yeah.
And so I got a load of medieval combat equipment and became a knight on the battlefields
Oh, wow.
of Normandy, but learned how to do medieval surgical displays.
Amazing.
Now that now I've stopped doing the fighting side of it because I found that with the police training, it doesn't do so well when you're trying to just fight safely against your friends.
Of course,
different kind of training. So that's why I started learning to become a monk.
Love that.
And so I could carry on with the boys and girls of the Reenactment Society, still do the medical displays,
Yes.
and the prayer. And I learnt a new facet of medieval life, and that was a real gift, really, I suppose.
That's brilliant. And what is your favourite time period or battle to reenact? Even if you don't do it anymore, have you always had a sort of soft spot for one particular one?
Do you know, to reenact the Battle of Hastings is an incredible sight because we'd always be on the Norman side.
Wow.
And so we'd be there with our kite shields and our mail shirts under our Spangen helms. And you'd drink the night before because you're with your friends. So you'd be staying in a medieval tent, so you'd wake up slightly hungover.
Oh, this is great! What a community!
Yeah, and you'd pitch out onto, and you stand at the bottom of Senlac Ridge, and it's middle of October, so you're cold, you're slightly hungover, and you look at the top of the ridge, and you see the Saxon army up there waiting for you with their shields locked. And they start to beat their axes and swords against their shields, and all you can hear is them chanting "oot, oot, oot," the old English "out." And you know that you're going to have to go up that hill to try and push them off that ridge.
Wow!
And they start to chant, "God win, son. God win, son," and they look so good, and you think, "Oh my, why did I drink so much? What am I going to have? Can I even get up that ridge in this much metal?" And then someone comes along on a horse and it tells you to kneel to receive the blessing of the Pope, or from the Pope's banner and ring.
Wow!
And the person who's pretending to be the Duke William, and you stand and you look to the left and you look to your right and you see your mates, and you're nodding at each other, and so you start chanting "A Normandie, a Normandie," and you start to march in step up that, and it's an incredibly moving sight actually because. It teaches you, I suppose, a bit about togetherness and what it must have been like to look up that hill and realise that you're going to have to drive them off. And even though you know that you're going to live, you know that if they hit you with that blunt sword, that's going to hurt actually.
Yeah.
With your head in that kind of state, you're like, I'm not sure I really want that to happen to me right now.
Absolutely, yeah.
I feel very privileged to have been allowed to fight at Hastings year after year.
Wow.
It's a lovely moment.
Is it done in front of an audience?
It is.
Okay.
Thousands of people come from across Europe to see it. But you tend to forget that actually, and you really zoom in on your narrow view. And so they a few years ago they did a huge reenactment of it where they got a load of ex-police horses so they could provide the Norman knights.
Oh wow!
You saw them thundering up the slope, but failing to break the line, and so you're sent in again and again to try and batter yourself against that Saxon shield wall, and the adrenaline is really high as you start to you feel the force of your kite shield jamming against their round to try and push the man in front of you over to try and get your blunt sword in through the gap.
Goodness gracious me!
Yeah, it sort of blows hammering against your helmet as you're trying to force them back. And actually I found over the years that experience was actually really useful as when I was going for public order training for the police, and they said, "Have you ever had any experience like this?" I said, "Well, actually, you show me a Saxon shield wall, and I'll be all right."
I love that.
It was very, in its way, very similar.
And how is the reenactment scene doing? Is it as popular as it used to be? Are you getting as many people joining it? Are young people as engaged as they once were?
Yeah, the numbers are really up, but there is a problem of a small group of people trying to impose modern political discussions upon reenactment.
In what sense?
And so some people were questioning whether when you were reenacting time periods, whether it should just be for white people. they were saying, oh, but back then, which wasn't true.
Yeah.
And we forget that actually Britain has been a multicultural society for a very long time. We were part of the Roman Empire. People travelled across the empire quite freely. The Romans moved large numbers of Sarmatian people into Britain, and so there are areas of England in 1066 that are actually quite diverse. But some people who don't like diversity seem to assume that that they can go to reenactment and spout some quite unpleasant rhetoric and try and exclude people.
What a shame.
And so, but I have to say that they are a tiny minority.
Good.
And I think you get that minority, sadly, in any walk of life. And reenactment societies are, on the whole, very welcoming and very open, because the people who tend to want to do reenactment, well, think about me and my friends in our Norman group. I don't think any of us would rush to describe ourselves as normal, but we're a community, and they are my family, I would say. And so if they are prepared to stand with me, I am prepared to stand with them, no matter their background.
Yeah.
And so I would say, if you're looking to get into reenactment, I think you'll find that on the whole it is a very welcoming community, a very understanding community. And it's one where if you have an interest, you can pursue that interest, and you can find a place for you.
I love speaking to people who aren't normal. It's basically that. It's basically this entire podcast, just one weirdo after another. Lovingly said. That's lovingly said. But I was speaking to a jazz musician, and he, as his career started, although he did tell me this character had been slowly forming all throughout his school years as well, he'd adopted this very vintage persona where he sounded like he'd just stepped off of the old BBC broadcast radio stations in like the 30s and 40s, and he developed this beautiful voice, and he had loads of inspirations for his character. He never, ever, ever once posted or has said it at a gig about his political views. He's never talked about politics. He's never talked about anything other than having a rip-roaring time.
Yes.
But there was a community, white middle-aged men, who said that he was a racist Tory.
Oh.
And that by having a jazz band in the way that he did, he was excluding an entire... And he was like, I have never... He said, it's jazz.
Yes.
He was like, where do you think jazz came from?
Yeah.
And I just... When you said it, because that similar experience of... Unfortunately, history belongs to everybody because... None of us were there anyway, so anybody can claim it. And the bits about keeping history alive, particularly on social media, in reenactment, or by going to a jazz gig, is that you always get, and thank God it's a minority, people who think it should be a certain way. So you either get one end of the spectrum where they're excluding, like your body of people who are like, saying, well, that, certain people should not be there, or you've got the thing where it's like, well, you've not got those people there, and it's like, we're not coming here with an agenda.
No,
we're coming to keep history alive. Him through music, and you through research reenactments of battles. And I wish people would sort of not separate historical values, because obviously Britain was more racist than it is, more homophobic than it is. Gender roles were completely different to the way they are now. However, it's about learning. We don't have to make it personal.
No.
And we don't have to exclude groups of people. And unfortunately, people do that. And even as a content creator now, I don't really know how to combat that. But like you said, you've got to just hope it's the minority, and you just got to keep doing your good work and stay in your community where you're safe, I suppose.
I think it's because it's easy to go from to try and find something for yourself and then trying to keep it for yourself, which is why I think your podcast is lovely, because you're getting something for you, but you're obviously sharing it with others, and so that it can be something for them too.
Yes.
And I think that's when reenactment is at its best, when you are doing something that you're gaining from, but you're sharing it with whoever will come and join you.
Of course.
Whether they want to be a reenactor or whether they just want to go and see a reenactment.
Yeah.
And so I quite like, after doing the medical displays, because I take the role of a monkish infirmary. So I run I'm the monastery's doctor.
Love it.
And so I talk to them about how I'd help my patients and what I'd do for my day, and to talk to people who don't want to be reenactors but would just like to know a bit more about what that monastery infirmary that they can see the ruins of, what would happen there.
Oh, brilliant.
And to explain it is really nice, to share something rather than to try and either, as you say, keep it for yourself and exclude others from having that too. I was doing one at Easter where, as a monk, I was doing the blessing of the Easter eggs and the lighting of the Easter candle.
Wow.
And talking through people about why this was happening.
Yeah.
And even for small parts of the monastic life. So we got you get a dragon on a stick and you wave it around, chased by a lion on a stick, because the lion represents God and the dragon is the devil.
Wow.
And the monks would pub crawl their way around the area that they looked after with these sticks to symbolise that God's authority would spread here.
Yeah.
And for them, it really was a pub crawl. And often, apparently, they would halfway through the pub crawl forget the sticks and just keep on going. But the community would join them for it, because it was a holy day or holiday, and it's what they would do. And so it was the community all having a good time together. If asked why, they're like, it's the message of God. But
He said with a tanker of beer in his hand.
as they crawl their way around their domain. But so it's very interactive, and it's nice to have a chat.
Wow, you really have to know your stuff then, if you're going to be interacting and potentially improving, and you don't know what questions you might get asked.
Some very random questions. Strangely, there's a large number of the British public that think that the medieval people didn't have bacon, and I've never been able to work out what they thought that they did with that part of the pig, but because you'll be there having some bacon, trying to patch yourself together in the morning. They go, well, that's not authentic. You think, well, they're just throwing that bit of the pig away. What do you think these monks are doing?
Brilliant.
But equally, because you're in an abbey and you're in monastic robes, I've discovered that if I walk away from the medieval camp and go into the abbey, some of the public are not entirely sure whether you're a proper monk or not.
Wow.
Because you're chanting in Latin.
Of course, yeah.
And so I did a short Latinate service during the day, and a charming lady came up to me, and she went, "Oh, have you gone and seen the reenactors?" And I had to say, "Well, actually, I am."
At least she didn't ask you for a blessing.
Yes.
That would have been even more awkward.
I'm not really sure that I'm appropriate.
Yeah. It might not mean much coming from me. Yeah.
Bless her. I'd give it a go. But
give it a go. Give it a good go. Absolutely.
Yeah, if it makes you happy, but nonetheless.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. And where do does your reenactment scene take place? Does it change location and venue?
It does. All reenactment groups compete, I suppose, to try and get relationships with the Castellans of English heritage.
Oh, okay.
So if you run Tintern Abbey for the English heritage, then you'll try and put on events, because they'll have a limited budget though. Yeah. And they might go, "Oh, I'd like something on Easter weekend. I know that I'll try and invite this group or that group."
I see.
And because of course the hobbies, you need insurance, you need travel costs.
Yeah.
And so we like to have at least some of that covered, but we'll try and get relationships with different historical areas.
It's so lovely to hear, and I've been hearing it a lot in these interviews about people's safe spaces of unbridled joy, and they've let me in. Everybody's let me in, and it's been lovely. And even though I'm only experiencing them by hearing you talking about them, I really am being taken there. One interesting question that I have been asking these people, and I'm going to ask you as well. The modern world.
Yes.
We're in it. Whatever we may feel about that, here we are. Do you think the modern world as it is now is making people depressed?
I think so. I talk to my pupils. I think we work so hard to fill houses with consumer goods that aren't giving us what we hope that they will give us. I think we have an idea that we can buy happiness, and that my house is full of more clothes than realistically I need. And
mine as well.
piles of stuff. But I'm not in that house right now, and this is one of my happy spaces. They'll be doing a show later on, two shows later on today for a theatre. I've had an amazing week putting on a pantomime for the hospital, and I have been so happy because I have been with people.
Yes.
And we have done something together, and we've done something for other people. For the children, and to raise money for the hospital.
Absolutely.
And I think the modern world is full of the message that you should work for yourself and to buy stuff for you, and that you will find your identity and your individualism from buying this thing and buying that thing and doing something for you. And I think that's made people depressed because they're told it will make them happy.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people feel lonely because they don't really have a place that's theirs. They've had something that's been sold to them by a company that they're told will be theirs. And so I do worry that the modern world is full of us all being lonely together. And if we could just reach out to people.
Yeah. I have to say, don't worry, I'm not using you as a therapist, but I feel that, and I felt that heavily because I'm sure people listening are going to be like, a Crimea River, but content creation's lonely.
Yes.
Content creation's lonely because although I feel like I'm part of a very strong, very large community online.
Yes.
They're beautiful people. Like, I'm so lucky. I get such good reception online. Like, I don't get much hate at all.
Good.
I'm very, very lucky. To say that it could be argued as sometimes controversial because it's not of today's era. It's of an era where there were different values, etc. So I'm very safe in my community. I feel safe in their hands, but I don't know them. I don't meet them. I don't have a coffee with them. And I don't enter a creative space with them. I don't bounce ideas off them. I don't run my scripts by them.
Yes.
Everything that happens that ends up getting put online is derived from me. I write it, I produce it, I act in it, and I edit it. And I post it. And that's lonely of a Saturday afternoon, just making content by yourself. And it's only because I was like so scared about doing these podcasts. I was like, this is going to be a nightmare. But you know what? Thank God. Because maybe the whole reason I started a podcast was because I was a little bit lonely. Yeah. And I just wanted to be with people again. And even being in this environment, like if you're listening, if only you could see it, like in this dressing room with all these costumes and people's water bottles and makeup, I'm just like, oh God, I can feel the energy in this room. And that's the good stuff of life.
Yes,
That's the bit we should be cherry picking, the sense of community. And so if you bring that from an era gone by, what is the harm really? Oh, you're all right. You can jump on in.
Talking about the community.
We are filming though, so don't. We're just talking about community and look.
And we have here one of our pantomime cast, Mai Tai, or Harry, as he's.
And what is Harry playing?
Playing the part of Mai Tai, the
come in, you don't have to go for
Princess's Handmaiden.
Say hello. Say hello to everybody. Hello. Who did you say you're playing?
I'm playing a French lady. Who's
a French lady.
Bonjour, everyone.
I look a bit French today, so that kind of works. Yeah, with the beret. Fantastic. But yeah, I think, the perfect timing, that sense of community. And I've really thoroughly enjoyed doing this podcast and getting to know people. And I just want to share one memory before we end this podcast from yourself that really stuck with me and probably made me into who I am today and probably led me to make content to do with a period of history I was passionate about to start with, alongside my grandpa. And it's when you dressed up as Henry VIII.
Yeah.
It's when you dressed up at as Henry VIII at school and you taught a lesson dressed as him. Yeah. I wager everybody in that classroom never forgot that because it was so wonderful because your passion fed our passion. So on behalf of all of your pupils, I'd like to say thank you.
Well,
and from me, I'd like to say thank you for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me along.
I've loved it. Thank you.
Pleasure.